Well, I never had any intention of writing about surfing. Maybe when I was a little kid here in Southern California, I used to write, short stories about, time travel back to when it wasn't crowded. It'd just be me and my friend and our modern surfboards with the Chumash Indians in Malibu and that kind of stuff.
That'd be nice.
It's like, it's like surfing, at least in Southern California, you're sort of like born nostalgic. I was a 9-year-old nostalgic. We all were raised on photos of, Rincon in 1947, 10
Totally.
feet, nobody out, that kind of thing. And we hadn't missed it by much. It was the early 60s. We hadn't missed it by that much. And yet it was gone.
Right.
And everywhere was crowded, and relatively speaking. And so I wrote about surfing when I was little, as these sort of fantasy short stories. But once I started writing more self-consciously, more seriously, I wrote poetry, and then I started writing fiction. I ended up doing a MFA in fiction, and surfing just receded. I just wasn't interested at all in writing about surfing.
Surfing as a subject to write about,
Yeah.
not surfing as a role in your life.
Yeah, they really sort of diverged.
Sure.
I saw myself as a writer, and surfer just kind of came with my upbringing.
Okay.
And I quit, what I would call quit surfing, any number of times. I just was into something else.
Really?
Yeah, not a conscious thing. Like I'm quitting. I didn't like get rid of my boards or anything. But like the first time I thought I did that was around my 16th birthday. I was, up till that point, it was like surfing first. And I was, I was 15 and I'd been surfing constantly for years, and it was, I could surf pretty well, and it was, for my age. And then I finally slacked off a bit and probably plateaued at 16 when I just got interested in other things. I had a car suddenly, and I needed a job to support the car, and
Right.
it took away time from surfing. And I was interested in literature and got interested in traveling for its own sake. Did a cross-country trip when I was 16 with my friend, and rambled all over, and surfed a couple times in Mexico and Florida, places we fetched up where there were waves, borrowed boards, but surfing wasn't like front and center as it had been
Sure.
through my adolescence up to then. And it went like that in sort of waves. I went to college in Santa Cruz, so I could surf all the time. But it was really, surfing didn't run my life. I sort of surfed when I had time, when I felt like, when there were waves, I could see it. But I didn't have any friends that I surfed with. There wasn't anybody else at UC that surfed that I knew.
Mm-hmm.
I've since met people. I just met a guy in Bali the other day who was in my class at UC Santa Cruz. But
How about
I never knew him. Now he lives in Bali now, but I didn't know anybody. So my life didn't run on the ocean's schedule all the time. And that was on and off through my late teens. And there were periods, before the end of my first year of college, my family lived in Honolulu at that time, and I was back and forth to Hawaii, and so I surfed in Hawaii a lot. And we lived there when I was in junior high. And I finally surfed Honolulu Bay for the first time. I was 18, I think. I was a freshman in college, and that was it. I dropped out of college, actually, and moved to Maui. I got to live for this wave.
Yeah.
And so I did that for a while.
Documented in the book a little bit.
Yeah, I wrote about that in the book. But kind of surfing kind of went in and out. It was this constant thing in my life, but it wasn't something I talked about or thought about. It wasn't how I saw myself. It was just what I did.
Sure.
And that kind of continued through college and graduate school, where I sort of went through periods when I was at the coast and surfing all the time, and then I'd go live in London for a while, or live in Montana, or just places where something was going on that I wanted to do. I didn't really worry about it. I'd eventually get down to Morocco and surf. I was living in England, but I wasn't sort of there's a way in which I kept it unconscious.
Sure.
And I wrote about completely different things, and then I had a job on the railroad in California, and as a brakeman on the coast. And I surfed a lot then, because I lived on the coast and could kind of keep an eye on the waves from my job. And then I was working on a novel that was set on the railroad. That might have had some surfing in it, actually, that novel, but still not sort of dominant. I just didn't see surfing as a literary subject or as sort of my self-conception very much. But when I was 23, 24, I finished graduate school, and I had a good job I could save some money from. This railroad job was well paid. I just sort of automatically, I mean, really without thinking, turned and thought, well, I'm saving some money now. It's time to go to South Seas, to do the endless summer thing, to just disappear and chase waves for years. So at the same time, I didn't think of myself as a surfer. I had this kind of idea of this mandatory gigantic trip which I had to take if I ever had the money.
Sure.
And so with a friend, I had a good friend, also a writer named Brian DeSalvatore, who I proposed, let's go. He had a job also, saving some money, and he felt the same way. Yeah, we just have to. I was 24, 25, he was pushing 30, and we just have to. It's the time. So we left in 1978, and I was on the road nearly 4 years, mostly in the southern hemisphere and South Pacific, Australia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, Southern Africa, etc., looking for waves and working day jobs. But obviously this was just like surf immersion. I just, surfing my brains out in all these places and exploring, trying to find, waves that nobody'd surfed before.
Totally.
And we found a few, and surfing some underground spots, in Indonesia and all over. I was in South Africa quite a long time. And so in some way, surfing, there was just no describing oneself except as, in large part, a surfer. This is what I'm living for. This is how I'm living. But it had this kind of shadowy existence for me for the longest time. And again, when I started writing for a living, which was in those years, especially after I lived in South Africa, became a political journalist, started freelancing, I still didn't think for a second about writing about surfing. It was years later that I finally kind of turned a corner and started considering it. So this memoir was a long time in the gestation.
Totally.
And even once I started writing about surfing, it was another 20-some years before I got it together.
Yeah. I know I've heard you talk about it as being almost like coming out of the closet as a surfer. And the way that I interpreted that was just kind of in the literary world that maybe, people would frown upon or look at it just as like Jeff Spicoli, you know, you're a burnout. And so how did those people receive the book, and did you actually experience any of that Spicoli stereotype or looking down their nose at you sort of a thing?
Well, not that I've noticed. No, not yet. I sort of need to now pivot back to my usual life as a political writer for the New Yorker. I'm allowed to do a lot of different things. Politics are very, very broadly defined. I can write cultural pieces and pretty much everything that interests me seems to interest my editors, and it works out all right. So I'm not out there covering elections. But actually that process was, the book wasn't maybe it's the climax of this long process of sort of coming out of the closet as a surfer and writer, as a writer who surfs, whatever. But it started, I was living in San Francisco, and freelancing and working on my first published book, and I sold a first short political piece to the New Yorker, just sent it over the transom, and they bought it and ran it, and somebody in the editor's office said, this is a good time, if you want to write something longer, you've got the editor's attention right now. So I proposed something, and I thought I had 5 minutes to come up with an idea, and I didn't have an idea, and I was sort of fumbling, and all I could think of was how about a profile of this guy I was then surfing with. I was living at Ocean Beach in San Francisco, surfing with this big wave writer called Mark Renneker, doctor, really interesting guy,
totally,
and just crazy big wave surfer, and Ocean Beach is this intense place to surf, and so I proposed that piece kind of almost spontaneously, and they bought it. They gave me the assignment, And that was when I was confronted with, oh my gosh, what have I done?
Right.
And because I was writing about politics then, and that piece took me 7 years to write.
Right.
Missed a few deadlines. Not that I just, sat on my ass those 7 years. I actually, during that time, I moved to New York and joined the staff at the New Yorker and published 3 books during that 7 years, and a lot of magazine pieces, but a lot of political opinion columns. I was writing the opinion column at the front for the New Yorker quite a lot. And so I was engaged in all these sort of policy debates,
Sure.
U.S. foreign policy, drug war policy, economic development, all this stuff. And I did. That's when I started thinking, do I really want to publish a big piece about my surfing life? Because it was a profile of Mark, but I was heavily involved. I mean, I'm in the water with him the whole time, and he was kind of an evangelist. You got to surf more. You got to surf more. You got to take it more seriously. You don't take surfing seriously enough. What do you mean you're only going to? You need another board. You need a gun. You need. And I was always kind of saying, I'll surf like when it suits me. But he did kind of give me more and more. I didn't buy a gun, but then he would loan me a gun on big days. So it was this thing, like getting me into bigger and bigger ways.
He just wanted somebody to go out with him.
Yeah, he was always looking for somebody to go out with him,
Yeah.
and he kind of nuanced limits. I mean, it was 20 feet plus. He didn't, hassle me too much, but it was a sort of the dynamic between us was part of the story. It was a big part of the story.
Totally.
And so I was really going to be saying, this is what a lot of what I've done with my life is this. I mean, it was around that time I remember looking at a surf mag. It's in the early 80s, and the editors had picked out, top 10 waves in the world, and little photo sketches of these 10 spots. And I looked down the list, and I had surfed 9 of them.
Wow.
And the only one I hadn't surfed was a place in Peru that I hadn't even heard of, and seems not to be actually that good.
Chicama?
Chicama, long left. Good wave, I'm sure, but the other 9 were really, and some of them were places like Honolulu Bay, places I had kind of lived at and lived for. Kira in Australia, I'd spent a long, long time there.
Right.
Jeffries in South Africa, I'd spent a lot of time there. And the nicest thing about that list in a way for me was that the best wave I had ever surfed was not on the list because they didn't know about it. It was in the South Pacific, so that was nice to see, and to think about.
Right.
But it was shocking to look at the list and go, oh my God! If anybody asked, what did you do with your life? I was probably 30 by then. What did you do with your 20s? Well, it seems I was chasing waves the whole time. I took forever to finish that piece, and finally turned it in. And I was also worried that Mark wouldn't like it, the protagonist, Renneker, the subject, and I was right. He didn't like it,
right.
And so that was another inhibition. But I was worried that people would say, oh, what? You're just, especially these other policy wonks that I would have been, sort of engaged in a kind of policy debate with. Over whatever subject would say, oh, you're a dumb surfer. We don't have to take you seriously.
Totally.
Which had never happened. I mean, nobody seemed to care. So
yeah.
I never heard anything about it. But, so that was that piece. And then that led kind of indirectly to this book, although obviously many years. That piece ran in 92. So 23 years later, finally the book appears. And so I haven't worried about it the same way since.
Sure.
But the difficulty of sort of sticking to writing about surfing or writing about my own life, a memoir, was the same in that the alternation in my work life is between these pretty heavy subjects. I used to do a lot of war reporting, and that comes under the heading of politics, sort of conflict, power, and justice. These are the subjects that have occupied me most of my career, and they're almost all stories that just they don't write themselves, but they force you to do them now. Something urgent. There's a war. There's a famine. There's a humanitarian crisis. I wrote about the Balkans. I covered wars in Central America and Mozambique, Sudan, Somalia, all these places that were blowing up at the time. And I wrote a book about Mozambique, the civil war there. And so those subjects demand to be written about. People are dying, people are suffering, and surfing just felt so la-di-da, so light and fluffy, and who cares? I mean, I cared, but why would anyone else care? That feeling. So working on this book, I had that problem too. I'd get into it, and it was in many ways fun to write, but I feel like I was neglecting real work. And so I kept sort of working on it for a few months, and then thinking, I've got to get back to something important, or my day job, which is also like needing to make a living. Yeah. So those are some of the reasons why it took so long.
Well, I've heard nothing but praise in the surf community among people who have read it. Mm-hmm. People, that work at the magazines, and then just listeners of this podcast have reached out and said that they loved it and recommended it and all that sort of thing. So that's good. I want to ask you a couple of questions about Mark Renneker, actually.
Okay.
Because it surprised me that was actually the most interesting part of the book to me. Like, I would have thought that some of the more exotic travel would have appealed to me more, because I've spent time in San Francisco and Ocean Beach, and it's like that's kind of my backyard. I thought I'd be more intrigued by discovering Cloudbreak or something like that, But it might have just been the character of Mark himself that's so compelling. The character of Ocean Beach, I think, is very compelling as well, just as a surf spot. I could probably relate to trying to surf waves like that more than I can surfing perfect reef passes. Are you and Mark still friends?
Yeah, we're still in touch. I haven't talked to him lately, but we get together every now and then when he's in New York.
Okay.
And we're quite friendly.
You mentioned that he didn't like that New Yorker piece, which, by the way, I'll post a link for listeners. I'll post a link to that piece, the 2-part piece.
Okay.
It's online, obviously, if they'd like to read it or if they haven't read it yet. But you mentioned he didn't like that piece originally. Did he ever come around to it? And do you know how he feels about his portrayal in the book?
No and no.
Okay.
He hasn't said anything about the book. And I sort of warned him the book was coming. And the portrait of him in the book is somewhat and significantly altered. Different from the magazine profile. No, he hated the magazine piece. It was actually a 2-part piece, and it was long, and so it was kind of like first part 1 week, second part the next week, and he said that the first part was fine, but he felt like the other shoe was going to drop in the second part, and it did, as far as he was concerned, and he really disliked it. And we went back and forth about it, and he had a lot to say, and he never withdrew his criticisms that I could recall. I mean, we sort of buried the hatchet, but
sure.
But it wasn't because he said, "Yeah, the piece is okay." Really,
right? He
never said that.
Okay. There's a lot of compelling characters. Mark's not the only one in the book, but how have the others responded to the book at all? Have you? I'm curious also, do you allow people to look at the book before it gets published? And then also, does that jeopardize the integrity of the work in a certain way? What's that process like as a writer?
Well, it would jeopardize the integrity, yes, to show people sections about them, for instance. I mean, plenty of writers do that, I'm sure, of memoir and what have you. But in journalism, that's pretty much not done.
Totally.
And that's sort of where I live and have spent my work life. And but for fact checking, you go over things with people, right down to every little detail. So you might as well read it to them, but sort of on principle, you don't. And I did a lot of fact checking with this, and it's different. I mean, memoir is quite different from journalism, because, with journalism, you show up with your business card. I'm here to interview you, and this is on the record. It's sort of understood usually between people. And memoir is the opposite. You're just suddenly, your whole life's off the record.
Yeah.
And you decide unilaterally to start writing and sharing all these sort of unguarded moments with with friends and loved ones, often many years past, and sort of arrogating that right to yourself, this license to depict, is really a tricky thing to do. So the fact-checking is more than fact-checking, and it's not the same. It's, I'm including this, and I'm including this. Is that okay? And then if it's not, why not? And let's talk it through. And lots of negotiation like that with old friends and frenemies. I mean, not everybody you're on great terms with or still in touch with. Whatever.
Totally.
And so there were some very tricky things, and at least one instance where I, without going into the specifics, got into a sort of fundamental disagreement with somebody about what had happened. Like whether I was there. After going through it and going through it and going through it until I thought we had it, then there was this announcement. Oh, but one other thing, you weren't there. Well, how's that possible? I mean, we've gone through this exhaustively over some weeks,
Yeah.
And now I wasn't there. Yeah, and the reasons, and I believe I was there. In fact, I was there.
Sure.
But this was this other person's moment, and I was more a witness to it. And it was a profound moment in their life, and it's important to the book and the story of the book, and so I just had to I thought, no, I'm not going to just do my version of it or our version of it as we'd worked it out. I'm going to have to take into account this final errant judgment, that, oh, by the way, you weren't there. And so I sort of smudged exactly when we got there, and when maybe this was the second or third, it just, I sort of acceded to what I didn't think was factually correct, but just was emotionally correct, or
Totally.
just was not my call in a way.
Interesting.
So memoir is quite, in a hard-headed, normal piece of journalism, sorry you don't remember it this way, but this is how it was, and I'm sure, and so therefore I'm going, well, in the case of memoir, where you've, people's lives, who are close to you, you're suddenly putting them in a book. That is not a simple, you can't do that unapologetically.
Totally.
And you can't do that without considering their feelings at every turn.
Interesting.
So,
very interesting. Tell me about the process of writing the book. Did you have journals that you had maintained from your travels that you were able to pull from, or photographs even? And
yeah, I kept really extensive journals when I was younger, less and less so now. Somehow writing for a living makes you, think, I'm not getting paid for this. And,
right.
I don't need to fill these books full of my every thought and observation. But when I was younger, I kept really good journals. And actually a couple of my companions, like major characters in the book, kept better journals, kept incredible journals. And I went back to them, my first girlfriend, whom I ran away to Maui with, and my friend Brian DeSalvatore, whom I went to the South Seas with. Both of them, in it's like a certain amount of disarray and despair at some point, I'd turn to them and say, don't you have like journals from Samoa or something, please? And each of them very kindly said, yeah, and like, let me see pages from their journals, heavily redacted. I assume all the blacked out stuff was like complaints about me. You're living together in very close quarters.
Absolutely, yeah.
Camping somewhere. And but wonderful stuff. Much better observed, I thought, than any of my journals. And so I'd say, I remember this, now can I use this? And we'd sort of, so little bits and pieces of other people's recollections and journals. But letters, I was a prolific letter writer much of my life, and I was able to recover some key correspondence. The biggest one, tons of letters to Brian, for instance, and to other people that I got back, and so I could see, here's what it was. Because there were times when I really wasn't writing anything down. I remember being shocked by these extensive descriptions of surfing Jeffries in 1980 and 1981. I was there 2 winters, and I thought, wow, and I sort of believed every word of it. I didn't seem to be exaggerating, but I hadn't written this down, and I'd actually forgotten a lot of it. Yeah. And the kind of astoundingness of surfing, big, clean Jeffries with half a dozen people out day after day. I sort of couldn't believe I did it.
Right.
When you look at it now, but at the time, of course, it just seemed like it was really good. It was kind of intimidating. The rides were amazingly long. There was hardly anybody there, but the hardly anybody there part almost took for granted. You know, on the weekends, these guys come from Port Elizabeth and it gets crowded, like 20 guys in the water, or something. But you don't realize how this is just a moment, and it's going to soon pass, and this tiny village is going to become a bustling beach town full of foreigners year round, and it's going to be crowded. So some of the letters I got back were astounding that way. But the most important cache of letters by far, actually, was completely unexpected. Childhood friend, Dominic Mastropolito, who lives here in L.A., lives in Malibu. He was my best friend, and my family moved to Honolulu when I was 13. And I wrote constantly to Dominic back on the mainland, you know, my adventures in Hawaii, or, you know, what it was like there. And he's not the kind of person who I'd expect to keep old letters. And I did it. We were there when I was 13 and 14, and I don't know, must have written 50 or 80 letters to him, these big fat letters. And suddenly this box, I mean, out of the blue, this box turns up on my doorstep in New York, from Dominic, saying, found these old letters, you know, thought you might be interested. And I'd been mulling this book. This is more than 10 years ago.
Did he know that?
No, I had not told him I might write a memoir, not at all. And no, I mean, I published that Mark Winokur profile, which had led to a discussion with my publisher, and then a kind of half-hearted commitment to a surf memoir. But I hadn't told anybody about it. I don't think I'd even taken an advance. I just was kind of semi-committed to it. I was busy on another book. And then this big cache of letters came from Dominic, and they were so rich. You know, I mean, written by a 13-year-old, 14-year-old. They weren't literature, but they were incredibly detailed. And some things in those I thought were exaggerated. You know, no way the current carried us to Cocoa Head. You can't get there from, you know, this. Yeah. And I'd have to sort of allow for, you know, and what, a stand-up barrel at that spot? You know. Yeah. But 90% of them or more were pretty modest and very sort of close to the bone, embarrassing, you know, unself-conscious, and they just formed the backbone of what became the first chapter. I decided I'm going to write this book, and it's going to start here, not like when I was born or first time I served or whatever, but here, starting at this school, in this junior high school in Honolulu, and because I had these very vivid descriptions from these letters, and they formed, and the way the book structure works, the beginning, the first chapter takes place in Hawaii in the mid-'60s, and then it kind of jumps back in time to California before that, when I was small. And but it was those letters that made me think this is where this book has to start. I can just feel it. Yeah.
Wow, what a gift.
Yeah. So I was lucky with that. I also did lots of just basic research into, you know, public sources, and, you know, if I got this right, is that really what was going on in Lahaina at this point in 71 or whatever, and just sort of basic journalistic research. And
I always struggle with, I think most people do probably, when you are on a vacation or on a surf trip or whatever, how much of it do you document versus how much of it do you just try to absorb the experience of? Yeah. And it's easier to illustrate through, like, photography. If you're going to be shooting video on a trip, would you rather be looking through the viewfinder the whole time or actually, like, witnessing it? Yeah. And I feel like it's somewhat true with writing to a lesser extent as well, where you have to just, like, extract yourself from the situation, recount the waves that you caught or whatever, and try to put it on paper. It pulls you out of it a little bit. And so it's a delicate balance, I think, to try to find, you know.
Especially with photography, which has become so ubiquitous. And I was never interested in it. My dad used to take pictures when I was small, and I remember I had this crazy ongoing argument with him when I was, 13, 14, 15. He'd come down to the beach and, you know, take pictures of my friends and me at Rincon or somewhere, and we were sort of happy to have them, but they were not surf magazine quality. We didn't surf well enough, and the ways he didn't know, you know, they just weren't publishable quality, but they were fun to have. And he would say, I see you always with your nose in these surf magazines, you know, write an article and publish it. And because I was always writing, and I'd say, I've got nothing to write about. And anyway, they don't care about writing. All they care about is photos, and we don't have the photos. Yeah, we do. I'll take the pictures. That's easy. No, Dad, that's not easy. He'd say, you're just scared of rejection. You're afraid to write for publication, which was true. I was scared of rejection, and but it was this kind of standoff in which I was so frustrated because he didn't understand. It really is the photos.
Yeah.
What they want is the photos, and you'd have to like move to the North Shore and hook up with some top surfers and spend all your time, and then get very lucky to get even one photo in the magazines. It's not that easy. And I'll take little pictures of us surfing, Rincon or Secos or somewhere. Were embarrassing. Look at them, they were neat to see, and then you think, in the mags, not a chance, And so it was this sort of funny ongoing argument. And so I just really wasn't into photos. But of course, everybody loves photos of themselves surfing.
Sure.
It's this intense thing, in fact, to get, oh, how do I look, because you want to surf with some style, but you don't really know if you are. And then you get a picture and you say, oops, I'm not. Or, oh, I don't look so bad.
Rarely are you, by the way.
Yeah, I don't look so bad, or whatever it is. And so it was kind of a loaded thing. And when it came to this book, the publisher said, have you got any photos? And I thought, do we need photos for this book? Well, not really. We'll just do we won't do color reproductions or anything, but it'd be nice to have a few. So I started digging through old boxes of photos and finding these crummy prints, that just managed to survive. And none of the photos you can't find. I remember the only couple of surf photos I could have cared about. Somebody I hardly knew, got a couple of relatively great shots of me in Honolulu when I was probably 19. And pretty big, good, and I was sort of peaking as a surfer in some ways at that point. Mm-hmm. And they were wonderful pictures. And he sort of got my address as I climbed past him on the cliff, and they showed up. They were black and white, but they were these wonderful photos. And I thought, and I sort of treasured them,
Yeah.
And because you so rarely get it. I mean, much more so now. I mean, there are sort of cameras everywhere now.
Exactly.
Cell phone camera, everything. But at that time, not.
Right.
And I didn't own a camera, and so.
Today, every answer matters more than ever before. Because whether it's about health, deliveries, or finance, some things just can't wait. That's why IBM is helping businesses manage millions of calls, texts, and chats with Watson Assistant. It's conversational AI designed to help your customers find the answers they need faster, no matter the industry. Let's put smart to work. Visit IBM.com/Watson Assistant to learn more.
And I lost them. I mean, in some move between houses in New York, like they didn't turn up, and I felt quite bad. I didn't want to admit to myself how much I was sorry I didn't have those photos anymore. Yeah. It had been like in late 80s in New York.
Okay.
But I did find that first I did a Q&A with Surfer's Journal, and they said, how about, you got any photos? And that's when I first dug through old boxes. This is maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And this memoir was coming. It was a ways away, but it was kind of based on you writing this book.
Right.
And I dug up some pretty good ones. Enough to sort of put together to illustrate a Q&A, but just by luck. 4 years of travel, I had a short stack of photos. Right. But here's 3 from Indonesia, and they all show Indonesia in '79 and me surfing or
totally
whatever. So they kind of and then you sort of look at the photos enough, they begin to represent the period. This is how it was. Well, wait a second. This is just one photo from 4 months. There's a lot of other stuff that you're forgetting that's outside the frame here.
Totally.
So photos are so important to surfing.
Really.
And yet I really didn't concentrate on them and didn't have much. But when I started to actually get some better photos in my middle age, late middle age, I was probably 50 by the time I started doing this. I started going. Way back when, my friend Brian and I found Tavarua in Fiji and camped there. There was nobody there, and just dropped off by fishermen and camping and surfing the way they now call restaurants. But at the time, of course, it was just a nameless, incredible reef break.
There was no restaurant.
There was nothing. It was like a fish drying rack was the only structure on the island. I slept on the fish drying rack, and so that was the great wave that I'd surfed that I thought was better than anything on the Surf Mag's list. On the right day, it's a truly transcendent wave. Anyway, we were very disappointed some years later. When we were the very first guys to surf it, I should mention, there were at least 2 guys off a yacht who had surfed it before we had.
Okay.
So it was just maybe a couple people knew, and then some more guys came off yachts, Australians, Americans, that year as we were camping, that surf season, that winter. It was 78. So by the end of that season, we reckoned there were 9 of us, I think, who knew about it. And we were all, of course, had a blood vow never to tell anybody, and that didn't work out. So years later, bang, we discover these guys are building a resort and all that. We're very disappointed, and yet I got over my disappointment at some point. I was dying to surf it again, and my sort of moral objections to the privatization of the waves. And they discovered Cloudbreak. We didn't know Cloudbreak was out there. And so then, they've got exclusive rights to these 2 great reef breaks, and which is, as I say, sort of politically indefensible to me and sort of morally obnoxious. But, my surf frenzy overcame my objections to the point that I started going there as a paying guest.
Sure. Starting
in 2002. So I think for about 8 years till it opened up and got crowded. I just went there every year or more than once, and I just went there a lot and got really into Cloudbreak, a more consistent wave than the island. And I had great days on the island too, but it's relatively fickle, and just really got to love Cloudbreak. It's very far from a perfect wave. Cloudbreak,
sure,
this big, shifty, messy thing.
Yeah.
But that gets great, and everything in between. And really, really fun wave, I think. But suddenly, there are these pro photographers around.
Yeah.
Oh, Bill, I got a pic of you. And it's this incredible picture. It's like properly framed. It's in focus. I look good. The wave looks incredible, So in my 50s, I finally started to get a couple of decent surf pictures of myself.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
About surf magazines, do you subscribe to any of the magazines now?
I do. I subscribe to Surfer and Surfer's Journal and Surfing, and I look at the Aussie mags, and there's a bunch of online mags,
there are
Beach Grit and on that are fun.
Okay.
So yeah, all too much.
Okay, good, interesting. Yeah. What are your thoughts on surf journalism? As a surfer and as a journalist, I would be curious to hear your opinions, because where have surf journalists succeeded and where have they failed, do you think?
Well, it's a kind of funny little field. I haven't really. I wrote one piece for Surfer about the opening up of Tavarua. My sort of last trip there was after the government had revoked their exclusivity agreement, and it was opened up really supposedly to local surfers. That was the idea.
Sure.
Or to people in general, but it was local surfers, Fijian surfers, who'd pushed for this thing and made it happen.
Yeah.
I'm convinced after having interviewed a lot of people about it. There's a lot of other stories out there about who pushed this thing, but that's what I ended up thinking. And yet it was really opened up to surf tour operators. That's who came in. And some of them Fijian, but a lot of them not. And so I wrote about that and for Surfer, and it was kind of normal journalism, and it was fun to do. But I got a lot of pushback from some of the people in the piece who were sort of outraged that I'd talked to everybody, but that's of course what you do as a journalist. But it felt a little bit like, yeah, but not in surf world, you don't. You're like on somebody's agenda.
Yeah.
If you're in a controversial area, which you're usually not. It's usually, profile some surf star or whatever. Or the story of a surf trip, or most surf. Most articles in the surf mags are pretty soft, and some of them are really good. They're it's a great story of a trip. It's well written, or Surfer's Journal concentrates a lot on surf history, and some of that's very solidly written and well put together. But in general, the monthlies, it's very, very light stuff, and I think the advertisers have a lot of input, and I don't know, I'm just guessing, but you never see anything the least bit investigative. You never see anything negative about any of the big advertisers. You don't, I don't know, you just don't see very lively opinionated, dissenting,
You don't.
dissonant
Right.
sort of work. And so I assume that's because they're advertiser driven. And the people I know worked at those magazines who talked to me about it generally have confirmed that. So it's not. And when I've teased people and said, why don't you look into sweatshop conditions and production of wetsuits from this company or that company, or that I've just been told you must be joking. That's never going to happen. So I'm not. This is not news that
No, not at all.
That the surf press is not the most sort of dynamic and independent kind of media. That said, then there's these, the odd bods who pop up and are irreverent. And I remember when I first got to Australia in 1979, I lived there for a while, and Tracks, this Australian surf magazine, was in a sort of heyday. It wasn't glossy; it was a big newsprint tabloid, and it was raunchy and irreverent and funny and you got the feeling that if any advertiser had anything to say, what they would publish is, fuck Rip Curl or whoever has anything to say. I'm not sure if that's true, but that's sure how it read and how it felt. And actually, my friend Brian and I did a series of pieces for them.
Yeah, that's right.
Because we liked, so it's not true that I haven't. We did that stuff too. I forgot, but that didn't feel like writing for the Surf Mag.
Yeah.
Because we were able to. We kind of came at it as these Americans, and Americans were like widely hated,
Sure.
Seppos and all that. And so we'd just be these obnoxious Americans that everybody could hate. And in fact, we wrote under our real names,
Right.
which was a way of going incognito because we were both working under fake names
Okay.
at the time on the Gold Coast. And I had this guy I was working with, the surfer, come to me and say, "Did you see this fucking thing in Tracks?" And I said, "What fucking thing?" He said, "These fucking Americans, And it was these Seppos taking the piss out of Australian surfing, talking about how lame it was. How surfing in Australia was just so mainstream and so lame. And he was, saying people are really annoyed. And I said, "Ooh, yeah, those guys." And, not the name he knew me under.
Right.
So
That's
we
hilarious.
just stayed under the radar with that. But that was, last time I saw Tracks, it was just another industry shill. It was just a glossy, boring, no longer distinctive magazine.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm not painting a very flattering picture of the surf press, but
No, but that's what it is. I mean, you're not revealing any new information. That's kind of how everybody accepts it. Everybody who's in the know is well aware of those details. I mean, you mentioned Beach Grit, and I remember the story of, Derek Riley backing Chaz Smith, the writer, when he wrote something about Mick Fanning using a racial slur at some point, and then Rip Curl was pulling out advertising to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and Derek stood behind Chaz and said, "That's fine. We'll live without that income." They almost weren't able to. But consequently, Stab has established itself as, somebody who does have an opinion, basically. And Derek sent Stab with Beach Grit.
And that makes those things feel distinctly different.
Very much so.
And fresh. And I did an interview with Derek recently and had a lot of back and forth with him. And I don't know all the backstories. You never know really who's making a living how, but he seemed very intent on calling it as he saw it. And that's not generally the case.
Very true.
I was thinking of I don't know Louis Samuels very well, but I did an interview with him recently, which was fun, and I've been amused over the years by him, and when he pops up and is just absolutely irreverent, excuse me. And just really, he's very tough on sort of bottom tier pros on the tour, and it's it's not nice, but it's funny. And who is your loyalty to? Is it to these guys that you're going to bro down with on the tour, or is it to the readers? Are you there to amuse the readers, and sort of hold surfing to a certain standard of candor and kind of rough give and take, or not? And Lewis seemed to be somebody who was obviously out front and funny and just going to do it. And then gets drummed out of surf journalism,
of course,
and then drafted back in because he's exciting and drummed
kicked back out.
But
I'm not a huge fan of negativity or being mean to people for the sake of being mean, but I am a huge fan of comedy, and his comedy seems to, like, the benefit of his comedy outweighs being mean to Kai Otten, in my opinion.
Well, that's the hard trade-off, especially when it's a small world.
Yeah,
and Kai Otten, he's a nice guy.
Totally.
And he serves 10 times better than you do,
totally.
et cetera, et cetera. But he doesn't serve as well as,
Right. Where will that interview end up, or where has it ended up?
That was for Surfline.
Oh, okay.
And it was
I didn't see it.
Yeah, it was a couple of months ago. They put it in an odd format, so that it's not. I mean, it's. I can't describe it well, but some advertiser kind of sponsors the whole thing.
Yeah,
and it's there to click on, and it's kind of resplendent. I mean, it's unusually lush and well produced. And with a bunch of photos in between.
I've seen what you're talking about. Where you scroll down and then things go sideways, and there might be a video. And
yes, and they do this occasionally, and they're all kind of lush productions.
Yeah.
But they're not actually archived properly.
Right.
So if you go down through, like if you, I think maybe search my name, it wouldn't come up, or it's not in Surf News. It doesn't come up. I mean, when I went to look at it later to check on something, I couldn't find it, and I asked. Marcus at Surfline, where is that thing? Oh, the way it works, it's hard to find once it's not up. Like, it's up for a few days or a week, and then it's buried. If you know where to find it, it's still there. But
I'll find it. For listeners, I'll find it and post a link in the show notes.
It was a pretty good interview.
I'd love to see that. Yeah. Okay, so speaking of surf journalism, why do you subscribe to those magazines then? I mean, if the pieces are soft, what are you getting out of them as a surfer?
I'm not reading them that much.
Just thumbing through the photos every month, kind of?
Pretty much, and picking up bits and pieces. I have to actually tell myself, go through this magazine now and then throw it away.
Because they'll back up.
Well, they stack up, and you end up leafing through surf magazines when you got other stuff to do.
Totally.
So it's not so I just kind of. It's partly to sort of stay in touch with something. Also, there's some incredible photos and bits and pieces that are fun to know or good to know.
Yeah.
Stuff from, I don't know, world of the pros or just kind of where the attention of surfing is shifting toward. And hell, I mean, there might be like a wetsuit buyer's guide and I need a wetsuit,
True.
So
here's my thought, and I'm curious to hear your reflection on this, is that I want all those things as well. Mm-hmm. But the surf magazine isn't the best way for me to get that information any longer.
You can get it online probably better.
Well, on Instagram, like the quality of photos that I see in the magazine, which would be the best selling point, as you've mentioned, I see those on Instagram now all day, every day, and up to the minute. Uh-huh. It's like, Pipeline was awesome this morning. Cool, now I'm seeing who got the best waves.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, those photos get printed as well in the magazine, but it's kind of like I'm also overwhelmed by all the imagery. There's more incredible imagery now than there's ever been before, and I actually don't need any additional imagery, and I definitely don't need, again, to waste more time thumbing through this thing that I'm ultimately going to throw out. And so while I want to support the industry and while I've grown up loving the magazines, it's gotten to the point where it's not even worth the $11 a year subscription fee to have this thing show up and take up space in my house. And so, and like, kind of more to the point is the journalism isn't very good. I think that would be the saving grace, which is if there was something interesting to read, long format, that would be a reason to buy it that Instagram doesn't offer me. And I actually don't want to read a long form piece on my computer screen. I'd prefer to have it in print. And I actually
prefer the images also in print.
Do you?
Not necessarily for the quality, but because I spend my whole life in front of a computer screen, writing and a lot of reading. I have to do it's easier online. And so to be able to like lean back and have a mag in your hand and look at the thing and flip it and look at the thing and not be at the computer screen is a pleasure. But it does feel if you're paying attention, like if you're on Instagram and you're or even just looking at Surfline every day and other websites, and it's all very old news in the mag 3 months later. And you feel that, and I mean that's true for the newspaper. I mean I check the New York Times 20 times a day, and the next day's paper feels like it's 2 weeks old. So there's that problem. But I do prefer to like have a chance to sit and look at something in my hands as opposed to on the screen. Just because I'm so sick of the screen.
Yeah. What stories in surfing would you like to see be told? Talking about journalism kind of avoids a lot of the important stuff.
Well, the thing that I'm interested in that I don't see in the mags, but I don't really expect to see in the mags either, is the kind of inflection points in the business of surfing. I'm not fascinated by the business of surfing at all. I'm one of these people who sort of wish it would all wither, and surfing would become uncool and fade as a mass sport, so it'd get less crowded.
Totally.
Now I know that's not going to happen.
Never.
So I'm, as in this fallen world we find ourselves in, I'm interested in how the surf industry interacts with surf media. And that little story you just told about Chaz Smith and Derek Riley and Rip Curl, for instance, that kind of stuff really interests me.
Me too.
I mean, this is politics. This is power. This is what's behind what you see. And that's what I want to read about. But of course, I'm probably not going to read about that in a surf mag.
Right.
And instead, you're getting editorially, there'll often be a kind of like editor's column at the front about that issue or, the theme of the issue or whatever the editor is going to sound off on. And the sort of tone of those and the changes as the editors change and it's not all edifying, but it's often interesting to me. Who is editing this magazine, and is this really his? It's always a him. Is this really his free space to say what he wants, and what are the constraints on what he's going to say, and why is he saying this, and how well is he saying it, and all the rest of it. I mean, that space will interest me, and then not. It can also kind of infuriate me. But once I'm into the body of the magazine, I just don't expect any kind of editorial independence, any sense of it. And that's always what I'm looking for is, tell me about things that I don't know.
Yeah.
And I don't mean what John Florence had for breakfast. I mean, what's driving your world? What can you not say? There's all this emphasis on the North Shore this time of year, and the Volcom house, and this house, and that house, and all this kind of broing down stuff. That's corporate. It's all got a corporate aspect and structure.
Yeah.
And I sort of want to hear about that. I want the sort of dirt on that. Who actually owns this company? What's the character of this company? Who calls the shots in all this? It's not a bunch of guys hanging out. It's a bunch of employees, I assume, of this company, and maybe they're buddies in some kind of like status structure there. But I want to know things that they're not going to tell me.
Yeah.
And so if I was an editor at one of those magazines, if you say, okay, what are your ideas for stories? I'd be hard pressed to go, we can take a trip to Chile,
Yeah.
But to get at stuff that I want to read, I'm not sure they're institutionally capable of it.
Well, that was the most compelling part about Chaz Smith's book. Did you read that book on the North Shore?
I didn't.
Okay. It's all about that, actually. It takes
Really?
place, on the North Shore with a lot of
one of the reasons I didn't, I read an excerpt and I read some reviews, and it suggested that it was this, I'm going to tell the truth about the North Shore and what a rough, low-life place it is.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time there and partly grew up in Hawaii, and I thought, I already know all that. I didn't realize that it was this...
specific stories of Graham Stapleberg getting punched out in the Billabong house because he didn't sponsor a local Hawaiian in the whatever. It's really interesting. Really interesting Eddie Rothman stories in there. His style of writing is not for everyone, and I'm actually not a huge fan of the style, but the subject matter is so interesting that I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, I will pick it up and read it. It sounds more in my wheelhouse than I realized.
I'd recommend it. What you're talking about, though, where I'm most interested, the space that I'm most interested in to see those relationships unfold is the WSL and their relationships with sponsors and lack thereof, and trying to bring in, outside brands, Samsung and Jeep and all this sort of thing. And they've had limited success with it. They've had some really good success, and then they've had, formerly, sponsored events this year. Now we're seeing without a sponsor, where it's just the Jeffreys Bay Open. It's no longer the Billabong Open or whatever. So yeah, with the magazines, I definitely agree. Like, there's interesting stories there, but with the WSL, it's almost like they're taking it to a new level. There's more viewership now with YouTube and everything else, to where the numbers are bigger than they've ever been. There's more potential to exploit, I guess. And and I think they're, again, trying to grow it and expand it in different avenues. Do you watch any professional surfing contests?
I do. When there's a WSL contest and the waves are good, and it's streaming, I'm one of those people, who should be working and is instead sitting there staring at a lull.
Well,
in Tahiti.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, really, really addictive and strange. I mean, and someone will come in, and say, "What are you looking at?" Just a flat ocean, and a couple of guys sitting there. It's a lull, It feels completely normal to me, even though I should be working, to sit there and stare, because we got to wait, because it hasn't been a set yet. But it's really good, and these guys are ripping, and it's gonna, there's probably gonna be something transcendent,
right?
Any minute, or maybe in an hour. But like watching surfing, and so it's pretty, addictive. Although I can't imagine non-surfers sitting there.
Heck no.
I mean, these are long lulls that seem like nothing to us. It was only 5 minutes, another good set.
Yeah.
5 minutes on TV of nothing, and then the guys trying to fill the time. The anchors aren't exactly mesmerizing, and then half the time they cut away and miss the next set.
Right. Well, interestingly about your book, something that I thought about often was that is true when you're what you just explained, but it's even more true with travel, where you spend 99% of your time traveling and lugging bags through airports and in cars, endless, hours spent on the road, then sitting through the lulls in the lineup to catch a wave. And I think in surf videos, they'll show, a 30-second intro of going through the airport and driving down the road and all that sort of thing, and then 3-minute section of them surfing in West Africa or whatever. And it's
on the best day they got.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's like, no, it's so different than that. Like, people don't really know, how much time is spent sitting in the tent camping.
Yeah.
So I think that's really kind of interesting. Among the WSL stuff and those, or maybe not even WSL, but just in the media that you're absorbing, I'm just curious who your favorite surfers are nowadays.
Nobody very original. I mean, I keep hoping that Kelly's going to win another contest or two.
Wouldn't that be nice?
And every now and then he, like in WA earlier this year, at the box he was good, but they moved over to Main Break Margaret's, and he pulled a 10 on this big right, and I just thought, oh, here you go. Those are high points for me.
You see those moments of glory with Kelly, but unfortunately they're not every heat like they once were.
Yeah, he has really down heats now, which I don't remember. I mean, I didn't follow him that closely through his competitive career.
Yeah.
I just always admired his, I mean, who doesn't?
Of course.
Really, really admired his surfing. And almost think of him as the... and now, of course, John Florence is you can't take your eyes off him. I can't anyway.
Right.
And when these guys flake out and don't advance in the contest, I usually lose interest. There's nobody quite as exciting to watch. Maybe if Dane Reynolds is in, or if Joel Parkinson is on fire, or somebody super stylish like that. Yeah. But guys just hucking huge airs. Felipe Toledo's pretty amazing, but not that exciting for me to watch. Same with Medina. It's sort of shocking to see Slater go flat and not get any waves and not be able to command the ocean. There's I watched him enough. I once watched Pipe Masters from the beach in the 90s, that he completely dominated from beginning to end, and he won in the final against Sonny Garcia. And he really seemed to be telling the ocean what to do.
Yeah.
It was that thing he had
Totally.
seems to have perhaps expired.
Well, yeah, maybe so. And I think it's reflective of what I was talking about at the beginning about surfing plays different roles in people's lives as you evolve and have other interests. And he seems to have a lot of outside interests at this point, other than like outside of competitive surfing anyways. Business interests. So it is what it is.
He really wants to do a big wave pool.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Or he paddles off to some other peak that's outside the contest area because and he's right. It's better over there,
right?
And maybe they actually shift over and judge the waves and let him do it. But he's really on the edge of not being into it. Shows up late. Doesn't know if he's going to show up for the contest.
Right.
Goes down the beach and surfs his brains out. And Portugal last year, and then is like too beat to. I mean, he's not into the contest, and he does seem to have. Doesn't seem to have lost much in the way of ability.
Not at all.
And even beyond athletic ability, and this is something I try to explain sometimes to with this book, which was really written for general readers.
Right.
Lots of people who don't surf or have anything to do with surfing or know anything about it read it and ask me questions about it, and I'm talking with them, and I try to explain that this huge part of surfing it's not athletics, it's not like gymnastics or something where you're just doing it in a space. It's the ocean, and it's reading the ocean, and half the time you'll see Kelly Slater or John Florence or somebody do some miraculous thing on a wave, and the question is not like sometimes, but not usually, like how did he keep his balance? It's how did he know? How did he know the wave was going to do that, and to, put himself there and to go that way, and then it's this understanding. It's the wave reading as much as the wave riding at any given point.
Absolutely.
And Slater seems to have that just out in his own on his own level.
And I would argue John is following suit in that respect.
Yeah, and has the same just kind of superhuman knowledge.
Exactly.
And you think, okay, pipe, he grew up there, that's going to happen. But it happens other places too.
Totally.
And you can, as a surfer, you can tell by these little, his hand hangs down, where his hand ought to be up. Anybody's freaking at that moment, except he's not. And you can tell from tiny bits of body language that he's in some, I've already understood this, and I've already understood what's going to happen.
Yep.
And I actually don't need to have my hands up either for balance or to sort of self-defense, whatever, what anyone else would do.
Yeah.
And the dropped hands say, it's an obvious example, that's why he's on the cover of the Surf magazine.
Exactly.
And a non-surfer will look and say, what's going on in this picture? Look at his hands.
Yeah.
I mean, how does he understand that he's got this?
Yeah.
For instance. And, some gigantic Tahitian right, and he's just very quiet body, hands down, and that's what's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's in his head,
Right.
So.
Well, that spiritual connection with the ocean, I think, is what makes surfing unique and magic for us. And you talked about in your early life getting away from surfing, but always in the back of your head feeling this need and knowing that you were going to have to go on this surf journey at some point, which I don't think that exists for snowboarders or for skateboarders. And they might argue that it does to an extent, but I think that surfing is unique. And it's not that I'm just, emotionally tied to surfing and I feel that this is better than that, and where you can argue about music that way, maybe you like this band better than that band. I think surfing truly is unique in that respect, where there is this spiritual thing. You are in nature, you're taking from nature, but you're also giving to nature, and there's this reciprocal kind of relationship. And I don't know, it's hard to put into words,
Yeah, sometimes I think that mountaineers, the couple of very serious mountaineers I've ever met, they've got places they want to climb that they haven't been, continents they haven't been to, and then that climb is something really heavy and has to be very well considered, and you get into a very intimate relationship with that rock, that mountain, that, it sounds familiar to me.
Totally.
And I don't know if a kid grows up mountaineering and says, by God, I've got to climb this place before I die. But I think there is some of that.
I think Yvon Chouinard did, as one example.
He's the paragon, yeah. And I, in fact, was just having lunch with an old friend who surfs and was more serious as a mountaineer, and he was talking about Chouinard and what he means to other mountaineers and climbers. And I was also asking him, how exactly do you, like, these routes, they rate them? This is a 5.9, this is a 5.10, this is a 5.12, these, more difficult routes. And I was asking him how that happens out I understand in a climbing wall in a gym, they just figure it out. And
sure.
This one's harder. But out in the middle of nowhere, on some Peruvian face that takes you a week to get to, I mean, who really can say that's a 5.11 versus a 5.12? And he laughed and said, it's just like surfing. I said, no. And he said, yes. And these super macho, incredible climbers will just say, that was a 5.10. And you get there and you think, this is not. It's like somebody saying that triple overhead wave was 6 feet. So it's the exact same thing.
Right.
Which made me laugh. And made me think those guys are a little more like us than.
Totally. But if you're in the know, you know exactly how that system works.
Yeah. And of course they called this a 5.10, and it was harder than any 5.12 I ever did.
But I do know what you mean. If you said it was 6 feet, I know what you really mean. And how 6 foot is different at Newport than it is at Pipe or whatever. In the sake of time, I'll give you a couple final questions. Talking about the evolving role of surfing in your life, what role does surfing play for you now, and how often do you surf?
Well, I live in New York City, and I surf around there, especially this time of year, fall and winter. That's when it's best. And it depends on the waves, depends on my schedule. When I'm in a good rotation, surf once or twice a week. Really just go in the window when the winds are right and there's a swell.
Yeah.
And often there's nothing to surf around there. And I travel for work a fair amount, and some trips lend themselves to, kind of surf detours. I was just in Bali, ostensibly for work, not reporting, but at a writers' festival, and so I surfed my brains out. There were a couple of good back-to-back late season swells, October, November. So I surfed a lot, and almost every trip that's anywhere near the coast, I managed to, I got in the water yesterday here in Southern California, even though it was terrible, but just, I'm here, I got to get in the water.
Yeah.
Which means a lot of borrowed boards for that kind of thing. And I take dedicated surf trips still at least a couple times a year.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I did a trip to Baja this summer. Some friends do an annual winter camping trip in Baja that I'll try to go on this year. I don't know. I got a couple of gigs, and my sister lives in Hawaii, and I make sure to visit her every winter. She lives on Oahu.
Perfect.
And sometimes I've got a teaching gig in February this year on Oahu, so I'll go a couple weeks and surf a lot. For those, I'll take boards.
Cool.
Although Oahu is always tricky, like whether to take a gun, especially when it's still winter. And I usually don't, because it's such a pain to lug. And with I have a gun, but like with a rental car on the roof, and if you take a shortboard out, then somebody might steal your board. It's a nice old brewer that I've got. It's sort of a classic that somebody might want, and it doesn't fit. So I don't take it, and then every time I'm sorry, it gets big, and all I have is my small board, and I go out and get killed or whatever. So
I think you talked about that board in the book, right? You bought it off the rack.
Yeah,
in New York, maybe.
Yeah. I saw. It was funny. I'd resisted. I'd lived in San Francisco and surfed Ocean Beach, and there were days when you certainly needed a gun, and I was instead having to borrow one. It's like resisting it. I don't want to own a gun. I don't want to be obliged to go out when it's huge. And then I moved to New York and wasn't surfing too much. It was just sort of taking surf trips and not surfing locally. And then I met this guy who was in Montauk a lot. We started surfing reef breaks in Montauk and really got on well. And then we made a plan to go to Madeira, and which was then pretty like our first trip. We never saw another surfer, so it was just hadn't been publicized at all as Madeira, but there'd been an article in the mags that we'd with credible photos, and Evan Slater and those guys, first real surf photo trip to Madeira, but they hadn't named it, but it was easy to figure out where it was. And so Peter Spacek and I, this my friend, were going there, and we knew it'd be big, and we just happened to be in a shop on Long Island, and here was this 8.0 Brewer gun, like a really nice looking board, and he said, buy it. And I just sort of like bought it off the rack. I'm thinking, what's this doing on Long Island? On Long Island, you would never need that board in this life. And I've never ridden it on Long Island, but took it to Madeira, needed it all the time. I went there for 8 or 9 years.
I loved that segment of the book as well.
Oh, good. Well, and there I really needed a gun. In fact, there were days when I needed a much bigger gun.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of a step for me. So I still have that board, but I don't usually take it. I went to Puerto Escondido a couple years ago and really, really wished I'd brought it.
Yeah.
I broke my board twice, and shortboard, and I just wished so I could like get in earlier. Not even on big days, like 6 foot days, I would have ridden the gun if I'd had it. Just to get in earlier.
Yeah.
It was so punishing and so hard to take off, and so crowded.
Yeah.
At 6 foot, when it was bigger, it's not so crowded, but. Anyway, so I do these surf trips, and sometimes combining them with work, and often just kind of going with a couple friends, and go to Puerto Rico in the winter.
Nice. Now
in swells. I'm sort of watching already for the first good Puerto Rico swell.
Good. You're still far more active of a surfer than most people are in their prime. So good for you.
I'm chasing it, but man, I'm getting old. It gets harder and harder.
Well, I mean, for me, the role has evolved in that for a long time, number of waves caught was very important to me, and like improving my surfing on those waves was very important to me. And now it's almost irrelevant. It's kind of like paddling out is good enough. Just like if I'm there when the sun's coming up and I get in the water, I feel great. And if I happen to catch waves, which I always do, even better, and
that's a good attitude. How old are you?
34.
You got a good mature attitude already. Wow.
Well,
I still haven't got that, and I'm 63.
Well, you went out at Sano yesterday when I wouldn't have surfed, so
This was just to like put out a marker. It was with ancient friends. It was the first place I'd ever surfed. I hadn't been there in decades. So it was just kind of catch a few. Well, but I still have the thing of I can't expect to improve. I get worse every year.
Yeah.
But a couple of weeks ago, that picture I just showed you, we surfed pretty big Padang, and only a couple of us going on the sets. So it was there were some people out, but nobody wanted the bombs, and so it was there if you wanted it. And I was on this little borrowed board, and I wasn't surfing well. The takeoffs are pretty easy, surprisingly easy, and then it just goes really hollow and shallow as you go down the reef.
Yeah.
And I didn't get hurt. Luckily, I never got like lip axed in the flat. I always managed to stay up on the way, but I was getting just obliterated. You know? And I knew. I mean, these are big, wide open barrels. I mean, I think I'm physically capable of like hanging on in there and coming out. But I would have had to really figure out the angles and just really sack up and grab the rail and have the right angle to get out of that wave. And I was thinking, I gotta surf this place a lot. I gotta just, if I had enough time here and I didn't get hurt, I could actually do this.
Yeah.
And I'm 63. What am I thinking? No, you should a couple of ways, declare victory and get out of there.
Yeah.
So I'm still in that thing of I'm going to get better. I'm going to learn how to.
Well, I think that is one of the benefits of experience with surfing is that you can handle bigger waves. Like you said, most guys weren't even going on those waves. You really don't think twice, and you can handle the paddling a little bit better. Your body wears down, but for some reason you get more effective in your paddling technique maybe, or duck diving technique, or wipeout technique, where you think that you would get more hurt from those wipeouts. I feel like the older I get, bothers me less.
Yeah.
I can maybe relax more or something.
I think, I've got a little more relaxed in bigger ways is what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't panic I haven't panicked much at all in recent years, and I've been in some bigger ways that it would have panicked me at 30.
Exactly.
I would have thought, oh my God, I've got a slightly better attitude now, although it doesn't always serve. I mean, I can't hold my breath as long.
Okay.
I realized that last year at Makaha, I went out on a shortboard on a day when it was like strictly guns.
Okay.
Big Makaha bowl, really clean, really, really good. But I was really struggling. I was dropping in late. I was airdropping. That was the only way I could get in. And I eventually kind of moved in to try and catch some smaller waves in a dangerous spot, and I got caught by a big set. Really, not by a big like outside deep water set, but by a set that really, really drove me to the bottom. And I thought I'd be okay. I stayed relaxed, but I completely ran out of air twice under a couple waves where I just thought I should be fine. I'm not fine. I had to climb my leash in way too soon up into the full turbulence, and so I've got to get a hold of myself.
Yeah, you'll always, I suppose, in light of everything I just said, you always end up getting humbled at some point by Mother Nature. Yeah. Inevitable, especially in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Do you plan to write any more about surfing?
No, I don't. Although I get offers now with this book out there. Like if I go next month, I'll go on assignment. Someone will pin my way to write something.
Yeah.
And I really don't want to do it. It's just the surf that's dragging me in that direction.
Totally.
I'm trying to buckle down and work and say, no, don't take this kind of fluffy assignment just so you can surf. But jury's out, I might do it.
I was going to say, you answered that question no, and then gave a long explanation for how you probably will end up writing about surfing again.
Exactly.
I have a feeling we'll see more. If not that trip, shortly thereafter. Final question for everybody interviewed is just, what was the last surfboard that you rode?
Yesterday. I don't even know whose it was. They just handed me a longboard it was long. It felt like maybe 9.6 at San Onofre. I don't even know who made it. I think it said Walden on it.
Yeah, Walden.
Okay.
It's Ventura County. Okay. Yeah.
So I was on a 9.6 Walden at San Onofre yesterday.
Cool. Very cool. Well, for listeners, again, the theme that we've been discussing of how the role of surfing evolves in someone's life, you actually kind of pick apart the subject of evolving onto a longboard in the book. There's, kind of a detailed experience of surfing in New York on a longboard, reluctantly giving up kind of the shortboard, not permanently, but just in that surf session.
Well, I haven't actually... I don't own a longboard, and there are many days, small days in New York.
Totally.
Winter days are small. It's such I just could barely surf a shortboard on it when it's small in the winter. And I said, I've got to get a longboard. This is ridiculous. I could be having a lot of fun. But I just haven't done it. I have all these excuses, but the main thing is I just don't want to do it.
Yeah.
I don't want to be that guy who's, now he's on a longboard.
Right.
But apartments are small, and cars, and the subway, and the airport, and all these reasons I have to not lug around a longboard.
Your depiction of that dilemma in the book was totally relatable.
Yeah, well, it's like the age thing, eventually. Exactly. And I have old friends who say, "Get a longboard, man. You're just,
Yeah.
But I'm not riding like a 510.
No.
My bread and butter board now is a 7.2 Rusty Quad.
Okay.
It's a solid board. But it duck dive's fine. It's still a shortboard for me.
Right.
But a couple of years it'll be a couple inches longer. And,
Totally.
Headed in that direction.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dave.
Absolutely.